Hey everybody. Hey and welcome to the Just in Time Cafe. I am Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe, and I am your moderator today. And if you have not been to the cafe yet, you are in for a treat. I'm very excited about today's webinar, Lean Time Studies Leverage for Engaged Team Performance. And coming to you from, actually right now he's in Vegas, Dodd Starbird. Dodd is a managing partner for Implementation Partners, consulting company that leads change efforts for clients by integrating best-in-class process redesign, team performance, and change management tools. He's the author of Building Engaged Team Performance, Align Your Processes and People to Achieve Game-Changing Results. That's published by McGraw-Hill in 2010, and The Joy of Lean, published by ASQ Quality Press in 2016. And Dodd has a BS in Mechanical Engineering from the United States Military Academy at West Point. We got a West Pointer, and an MBA from the University of Denver. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and he is my friend and colleague, and I'm very excited to have him here. Welcome, Dodd. Let me see if I can get,
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth. Great to be here at the cafe with all of you.
let me see if I can bring, there you go. I've
There
invited
we
you to
go.
start your video. There you are. Hey, Dodd.
I'm here.
Um, and just a few housekeeping items for everybody else. You can ask questions anytime, put them in the chat area. There's also Q&A. I'll check that if there's anything ends up in there, but we generally look at the chat so everyone can see the questions and comment. And this session, all of our webinars are recorded and they go up on the Just in Time Cafe website, usually the Monday after the webinar. And as you have been joining us for our first activity, which is finding out where you are from, we've got Louisiana, we've got Paris, Tennessee. I said Texas. Sorry, Laura. Paris, Texas. It's Paris, Tennessee, not France. We got Dan in LA. We got Creusa from San Diego, Annie from San Diego, Russell from Wisconsin, Emily, welcome from South Dakota. Faisal pulling an all-nighter there in India. We appreciate. And Dodd, now you're officially international, so that's good news.
There we
Um,
go.
we got Fred in Kansas City. We got Lynn in Iowa, Fairfield, Iowa. We got David in Missoula. Olga, welcome, Olga. Another just-in-time cafe webinar aficionado. We've got Matt in Boston. Thank you, Matt, because we need some East Coasters. We got Michelle in Florida and Jacksonville and Miguel in Irvine, California. Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming today. I think this is going to be a great session. And I just want to go through a few upcoming events at the cafe. So first off, if you have not checked out this podcast, this is such a great podcast. We called it Sheet Metal Meets Unconditional Love. And it is just that. This is Meg Brown, head of VP of HR at Cambridge Air Solutions, and they kind of did a restart of their entire lean culture. And they've had unbelievable success, so you should check that out. And then we did our app review, was a mobile diary that helps you with reflection and adjustment, right? Little personal PDSA. And then Q&A, we talked about what makes us, and there's some science behind why we constantly try to fit 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. And then next up, we've got a webinar coming to you on November 21 with Jen Tankanow. And she built a way to both bring PDSA to any industry, and she also discovered kind of what makes it work. And part of what she does is bring in a interactive workbook. So she's going to sort of show us how what she did made a huge difference with both teaching, engaging, making it stick, using real world application, all together. So we are psyched to get Jen back at the cafe. And with that, I hand the reins back over to my good friend, Dodd Starbird.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hey, so happy to be here with everybody. So excited to be talking about this. Certainly, as we go, if you want to ask questions in the chat, like Elizabeth said, we'll try to reach them. But I want to at least start. I won't read my. I appreciate the reading of the bio there, Elizabeth. I won't read more to you about what I've done. I started out doing lean back at Coors Brewing Company, and then moved to Johnson and Johnson and got a Six Sigma black belt in 2001. So long time ago. And then actually did the master black belt thing a few years after that. Have been doing this ever since then, leading consulting engagements across a variety of different clients, variety of different business types, and just really hope we can have a great conversation today about using some of the data that we can get from time studies to help us do our Lean Six Sigma projects better. So that's actually here in the outcomes. If we talk about understanding the connections between what we'll call engaged team performance and Lean Six Sigma tools, talking about the value of time studies, we will demonstrate a typical time study tool. We'll say it's typical because we've seen a lot of them that are similar, and we'll explain why we like the one that we've developed here, what we think it can do for you. And then we'll talk about, most importantly, it's not just how to do the time study, but the most important thing is, what do you get from it? What outcomes or deliverables do you get, and how can that help you manage your business better or lead better projects to improve processes? And even more important than process improvement, believe me, or believe it or not, is the controls that come with the process improvement. So being able to have measures that help us understand how the business should run. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about engaged team performance. This slide actually sort of is a picture of what I would say is the nirvana, or the perfect outcome. And if you start sort of in the middle where the blue boxes are, you can imagine that the first thing you have to do is streamline the process. It's what we've all learned in Lean Six Sigma school, is we streamline the process, we line it up with the customer. In order to do that, we have to know the customer. We need to understand the voice of the customer and understand their client's needs, their customers' needs. And then the team goals and customer needs, you see the arrows pointing together at that target. One of the things that we sometimes find is that the teams have goals that are based around what they can do instead of what the customer needs them to do. And if those things are two different things, then you're going to be, unfortunately, chasing your tail a little bit as the customer comes back and says they want something different, or that you're not giving them what they need, or if you're not giving it to them fast enough, or whatever. So it's really important, once you understand the process and the customer, to line team goals with the customer, and then support the team from behind with visible work and data so that they understand whether they're hitting that goal or not. And then finally translate that goal into individual standards and collaborative norms to say, okay, how are we, the team, going to do that work in a way that meets the team goal, in a way that meets the customer's needs, and how's it all lined up together, supported by proactive leadership, infrastructure, technology, and organization. So all that kind of makes sense from a standpoint of looking at it hypothetically. And then, unfortunately, when you see real things on the ground, maybe at your company or at a company you've been at before, somewhere, you might see misalignments between these things. You might see, the team has a goal of getting this done, but they're backlogged because they don't have enough people, or because some of the people are doing other things instead of doing the work that needs to happen in order to hit the team goal. So, and you probably have lots of stories. You can probably think of different times where some of these things were misaligned, or we didn't have the right measures in place, and the right measures were not driving the right behaviors to try to get to those goals. So that's kind of the concept. What we'll do when we say, we call it engaged team performance, because we're really focused on trying to get that team to be able to operate on its own with the data, with the team goals, with the knowledge of the customer, with a good process that they have documented, and to be able to plan its own day and do its own work without having to be told what to do all the time. That's why we call it engaged team performance. When we start an engaged team performance effort, you're going to be able to see, if you're familiar with Lean Six Sigma, define, measure, analyze, improve, control kind of approach to improving things. You'll be able to see that here in the ETP steps. So when we talk about the approach we take with clients, in some ways it's Lean Six Sigma with a heavy control phase. If you look at this, so it's got commit to change, very similar to define, measure and analyze, pretty similar to measure and analyze, and then streamline the work is very similar to improve or implement. And then the control part is actually really heavy. If you can see, steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, and even 8 are really the controls of making sure we understand where the work is. The work and data are visible to the team. The team's organized around the work. We have team goals like we just talked about before. And then we have to transition and sustain that so that the team can own its work and can be accountable and productive. So in order to do that, on the left-hand side of this, we say, when we embark on this kind of project, it's sort of like a Lean Six Sigma baseline with a whole bunch of control focus. We try to make sure that everybody knows ahead of time that we might be changing a lot of stuff. We might be willing to change almost anything in the process. Processes, measures, goals, collaborative norms, work areas, org structure, all those things are in scope. And all the roles that are being that are in scope for that team are in scope for us to look at all the people doing all the work to try to see what we can do differently. And so many of you have probably experienced similar things before. If you've been leading Lean Six Sigma projects, or if you have some experience in that, it's very similar here. We're just putting a different kind of twist on the team performance part and saying that the outcome of this is not just a streamlined process. It's a streamlined process that's intentionally designed for the team to be productive and to meet the customer's needs efficiently and effectively. So hope that makes sense. I'm going to segue here into the time study thing a bit, though, and actually, before I'll go back to that slide for a second. Before I leave that slide, I'll say, one of the tricks here, and if you've experienced this in leading your own Lean Six Sigma projects, one of the tricks here is in streamlining the work, improving the process in a way that you can sustain in the future. But in order to do that, there's a lot of work to do in that measure and analyze phase. And we actually, in Lean Six Sigma, it's a separate phase. It's measure and then, define, measure, analyze, improve control. We put measure and analyze together in ours because we find it's cyclical, that you end up measuring and analyzing, and it happens multiple times in a project. So rather than making it feel like two separate phases, we kind of jam it together. But the most important part of measuring and analyzing the process is probably just looking at the process. Job shadowing, mapping the process, understanding what the process really is. And I think in the intro or in the invite you saw to come to this webinar, we talked about the fact that, if you're familiar with Lean, you probably know a bit about standard work already. That basically by mapping the process and understanding the process, we can create standard work, which is a way of everybody knowing how to do the same task in about the same way so that it gets to the same deliverables efficiently. What we don't always talk about is standard time. So once you understand the work, then you can measure the time to do it. And if you know the standard time to do the standard work, it unlocks a universe of possibilities around staffing models, performance controls, measurements, predictions, things like that. So we're going to show you both. We're going to be able to show you how we can use time study data to go after process improvement, but also how we can use it to go after performance and prediction of what the team should be able to do. That's what the whole discussion is going to be about. Before we do that, we need to explain what a time study is and how we do it. This is a slide we actually use with clients when we're rolling out time studies. And on the left-hand side, it talks about the scope. Basically, the one thing that I would say is the most different thing from what we do versus when you're doing the classic Lean Six Sigma approach is that in Lean Six Sigma projects, they always tell you narrow it down before you start. Try to get a narrow problem statement or opportunity statement. We're intentionally broad initially when we go through a time study. We say, if we're going to choose the scope carefully based on what we've looked at, but once we've decided a role or a part of the process is in scope, or multiple roles that touch the process are in scope, we're going to measure everyone in that role and we're going to measure everything they do. So it's not a sampling approach. It's not trying to predict how we can get a representative sample of the people to time study. And it's not sitting behind them for 20 minutes with a stopwatch. Because that's the old way of doing time studies. This is a self-reported time study, and this is now in the center column, where everybody tracks their time to the nearest minute as their tasks occur for a good long time, for weeks. And that sounds awfully painful. It's actually awfully painful. It says that at the bottom. It's painful. It sounds awfully painful. It's awfully painful for the first couple days until people get used to using the system. And the leadership team has to be fully committed to doing this, and the people have to cooperate. And we end up having to go through a little bit of a cycle of pain to try to get everybody using this system that we're going to show you to get this level of granular detail. But again, once you get that level of granular detail, it unlocks all these cool things you can do with measuring the work. And so we're going to ask everybody to track their tasks the nearest minute as they occur. We're going to show you a demo of a system that we've created. It's a web-based system. We used to do this in Excel, even up to very recently. And we've put this into a web-based system that's friendlier and quicker, but it's still a pain. It's still a pain to have to track the start and stop time of your work and to give us some information about what the task was. And the only positive to it that I can think of that we tell people is we're not tracking the personal time. We're only tracking the work. We're not interested in how long it takes you to do break or lunch, or if you go to the dentist or something during the day. If there's something that happens during the day and it's not work, we don't expect you to track it. We do expect you to track all the work, whether it occurs day, night, weekend, whatever, because we want to aggregate. One of the things we want to do is just aggregate how much work is going into different kinds of tasks, so we understand how much effort those tasks are drawing, regardless of what time it occurs at the day or night. And so I do remember one time I was doing one of these time studies, and it says checkers review the data every night. Basically, what we'll do is we'll let the person do their time tracking, then we'll pull the data, we'll export the data every night, and we'll have people look at it to make sure that the people are doing it right, so that if they're doing something wrong, they don't do it wrong again tomorrow. So we have people working on swing shift in the evening, looking at those at the time study, and then providing feedback. So first day of the time study, this guy I was looking at, I'm looking at his time study, and it says, 7:42 to 8:05, it says some task, and then it says 8:05 to 9:26, it says shower. And I'm like, I do not want to know how long you were taking a shower. I don't want to know personal time of any kind, lunch, any of that. So we only want to know the work. And then to the right of that, where it says only track the work tasks, not personal time, we'll be upfront with people. Like, this is not a contest to report the most work. It's not a contest to report the least work. Just report all your work. Just track all the work you're doing. We don't expect anyone's work to add up to 8 hours a day, because we already talked about the fact that we have breaks and personal time and other stuff like that. We don't expect it to be 8 hours a day. In fact, if it is 8 hours a day every day, I'd be worried about you, that that you're being maybe too regimented about what's going on here. And then nobody's going to be rewarded or punished for reporting the truth. So if you only did certain number of hours of work in a day, nobody's going to get on your case about that, as long as you tracked all your work. So that's all we need you to do, is to track everything. And it's just an exercise in accuracy. And we even turn off performance measurements during that time. If they have goals for numbers of things they do, or if they have some kind of goals around how much work gets done, we intentionally have leaders turn that off. And we say, we don't, it's not that we don't care. It's important. Productivity is important. But at this point, we just want to know how long it takes to do the work, so that we can improve the way we measure productivity in the future. So that's a lot of detail. Oh yeah, please.
Sorry. Vernon was asking, do you want them to list the start and end times, or the time on the task?
Oh, we're going to show you. We ask for the start and end time. It's a way of making sure the time on the task is honest. It actually is down there on the bottom of assessing data integrity. There are some people, when you're doing a time study, who for whatever reason mistrust the purpose of it, or have things going on that they don't want you to know about. Like we've all heard the quiet quitting, these people with second Uber jobs, whatever they're doing during the day. There may be some people who don't want you to know what they're really doing. And so we have some ways of telling whether that's happening or not. And it's not that we want to punish anybody. We just don't want to include their data if we don't trust that their data is accurate. So we do ask for the start and stop times, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that as I show you the system.
Cool. Thanks.
I'm going to switch into the demo. Elizabeth, were there any more questions?
Not right now, but if anyone does have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or I pulled that one from Q&A. Thank you, Vernon.
Yep. I am going to share a different screen then. provided I can find the darn thing. Here it is. And this is, you should be seeing a web-based interface. What we do is we give people a login. They get a link. They sign up for a login. It's all comes through an email from their leadership team, so that they're comfortable that this is something that they've been asked to do. We bring them to a 1 hour meeting where we give them even more information than we're giving you. We give them that same slide we just talked about. We talk about the purpose of the project, whatever project they're working on. We talk about how it's important to their business, and then we show them how to use this thing. And in this case, I've got a role grayed out here. This is a role from a real client. So I'm showing you a demo that's actually live right now. This is a time study currently going on with a real client. And I'll come back later and delete my data. I'll show you how to do that too. But I'm going to actually add some data in here. And what happens is when they get a login, they get to this page of creating tasks. Basically, all they're supposed to do is start the clock, pick a task from the task list. I'm just going to pick training. I'm training you right now how to use this system or whatever. So I'm going to say training. When I pick a task, it has some mandatory fields of other things it wants to know. So what kind of training? This was a webinar for JIT Cafe. And I can put whatever I want in here. This is a free form comments box. And then there's also other things that we might ask. In fact, we always ask for an outcome because it's useful to us to know whether I finished that work or whether I was interrupted, or if I stopped working on it to go to lunch and then I came back after lunch and finished it. I wouldn't want it, like, for example, if I worked on something before lunch and then I came back and I started a different task, not the same task, because I don't want to include the lunchtime in the task. So I end the task, I go to lunch, I come back, I record another task after lunch. I don't want to count that as two because I really only got one done. And if I count it as two, it makes it look like it's shorter to do the task than it really is. So that's why we keep track of the outcome. So in this case, I'm going to say, I'm actually going to use suspend to keep working on it later. I'm going to say that I was in a training meeting for a webinar for JIT Cafe. And this might happen to you right now. Somebody might be multitasking right now. One of you might be out of 28 or 30 people that are here. No, Elizabeth, it's not you. But somebody else might be like listening to me kind of, but then the little pop-up, the Outlook pop-up goes off and you're like, oh, squirrel. And they chase the squirrel of whatever the thing is that just popped up for you. And in that case, we wouldn't want you to be tracking that you're in the meeting, because you're really chasing a squirrel. So we teach people to track where their brain is, which is painful. This is one of the hardest parts of this. Before I show you that, though, I'm going to say, we really didn't start this webinar at 11:21. I hit the set value button later because I hadn't gotten to this part to show you yet, but I wasn't keeping track of this in a time study. But if this was real and you were really in this training, you would need to change this time to 11 o'clock or whatever time you started the meeting. And we let people do that. We give them, they can change the date, they can change the time. If I mess something up, I can just hit the set value button again and change it back. I just was able to get the right date and time in there. And now at this point, I'm going to say submit. And what it does is it submits that record. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this view history button up here and show you that I can go back later if I want and look at what I've reported. And actually, it's ordered with the most recent task at the top. So it's in reverse order. So the most recent thing is at the top. This is the task I just recorded. It says 11 o'clock to 11:22. If I wanted to delete the task, I could. If I wanted to edit the task, I could. I can go and hit the pencil button and edit the task and change webinar for JIT Cafe, Elizabeth is the best. Whatever. I can put that in there. I can hit submit. And then if I go to my history and go back to this, I can show you, yes, it took that change. Elizabeth is the best, verified. So as I move forward, I'm going to show you a few more, and I'm going to pretend I'm still in this meeting, but now I'm multitasking. I'm going to pretend that the situation I just told you is right. Like I was in a meeting, I was in a webinar, but now my brain has completely left the webinar and I am working on, I'll pick an easy one here, coordinating, contacting or answering questions from an internal role. Somebody sent me an email about something. And there's more information here, and this can be harder to fill in. Again, once people get used to it, it's not so bad because it's the same questions over and over. But if it's related to a sales opportunity or a Zendesk ticket number, which are two workflow systems this particular client uses, they would need to give us one or the other numbers. If it's not, they wouldn't, because this is not mandatory. There's no star here next to these questions. There's no red star. So if a sales opportunity number existed, they could give it to us, but if not, they don't. And then there's a couple of other important questions. And this topic list, for example, has a lot of stuff on it. You can see there's a long list of stuff. So we wouldn't want them to have to search that list. Again, they'll get used to the ones they typically use. But if they were coordinating and meeting about a drawing or something like that, they could start typing the word DRAW, and it would limit it. See how it's limiting the things to just the word. So if I type a part of a keyword in there, I can quickly get to drawings. And that's the thing I was working on. And if I roles coordinated with, maybe I was coordinating with an application engineer, I get used to doing this fast. It's only taken me a minute so far. Comments, meet with Joe, and then the outcome. This has more outcomes. A completed step might be the same thing. I got done with meeting with Joe. These internal and external delays are when I'm waiting for something. So some of you may be very familiar with, if something's not in good order, we're keeping track of that because I'm not really done. I had to ask Joe for something, and then Joe's going to come back later and give it to me, and I'm going to finish this drawing discussion. So I'm in the midst of this. I get done with it and I hit set value. Notice I've been talking about it for a couple of minutes. And like I said, when you first start doing the time study, a person might feel frustrated because it takes a minute or so to go through these subordinate questions. Once they get used to it, it becomes about 20 seconds. And we've measured that too. It's not awful.
Hey,
Yep.
Dodd, since we're talking time, Faisal asked, are we talking stopwatch, time study, or work sampling? And it sounds like kind of stopwatch. Are there?
Yeah, so when you say stopwatch or work sampling, I might have described this earlier when I was on that last PowerPoint slide that had the little blue bubbles on it. But we do everybody, not a representative group, because we don't want to try to pretend that we know who's going to be representative. So we do everybody, and we do everybody for a long time, for weeks. We have them do this time study for a long time. So we get a very large sample size. It's not a classic stopwatch, because a classic stopwatch is somebody standing behind you with a stopwatch. This is, you are the stopwatch. The person doing the work is the stopwatch. So yes, Elizabeth, it's a stopwatch, but it's not the old stopwatch of somebody with a clipboard and a stopwatch stands behind you and measures things. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to measure for a long time, to get a great sample size, to make sure we've got super data integrity, and to have the people participate in it enough that they get past that pain mode and get to being able to actually learn about what they're doing. They can, like, after I'm gonna hit submit here, and I'm gonna go back to my history. I can start looking at my history, and I think I told you it puts it in reverse order. I can look at, this was the most recent thing I just tracked. I can start looking at my history and see what I was doing today. I can see how many times I get interrupted. I'll show you that interruption function in a minute. There's a lot of things that I can do that are more individualized to that person, because we have everybody participating. So I think that probably is the answer to your question. But if there's other questions about the structure of it, I'd be happy to answer those.
Here's a follow-up from Russell. What happens
Yeah.
if someone forgot to start or stop the time?
Yeah, sure. Well, so if they forgot to start the time, like they come in and they hit the set value button and they forgot and they really started it at 12:22. I'm sorry, 11:22. They can just put 22 in there. I mean, the whole point of that is that it's set up so that they'll be able to change that if for some reason they forgot to start the clock. So these set value buttons are useful just to get the format in there. But then if I want to change the time, I can change this to 38. Now, if I change this to 11:38, 11:38 hasn't happened yet. Here, I'm here on the West Coast. I'm in Las Vegas. So whatever time it is for you, but 11:38 hasn't happened yet. So if I hit submit right now on the task that's for the future, Actually, our system, when we later look at it, when our checkers pull it, we can tell that because we have metadata on when they hit this submit button. And I can tell they hit the submit button at 11:29, but they said it was 11:38. And if it was just a typo or an error and happened once, no big deal, we ignore it. But if it happens a lot, or if it happens at the end of the day and the person says they're leaving at 5:30 when really they're leaving at 4:30, that could be a different kind of problem. Again, we said we're not going to reward or punish anybody as long as they tell us the truth. There are occasionally people who try to lie on a time study, which is really kind of silly. But it's funny. One of our clients said this year. They said, all the data turns out to be useful. The data from the people who are tracking accurately turns out to be useful because we get a great sample size of how long it takes to do all the different kinds of work. The data from the people who are tracking inaccurately tells us a lot about people who are inaccurate. We learn about our people because they are not capable of filling out a time study, or could be even that they're intentionally deceiving us. So we have some ways behind the scenes to make sure that to see how often the time that they said it was matches the time they actually hit the button, or how often they backdate it to a different time. And if they forward date it, that's even worse because that's really kind of lying. When you don't really know you're done with something to say that you submitted at 11:38. So it's funny. We give people enough opportunity to tell us the truth, and then we see if they do. It's very interesting. Great questions. I appreciate those questions. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. I'm going to come back to my history and come back and start a clean page. I'm going to pretend I just started a task, and I'm going to say that task was drafting a statement of work, whatever that is. Nope, I'm actually going to pick a different one. Sorry. I want to pick something more complicated. I'm going to pick fault investigation. The fault investigation asks for some other information. It asks for a contact method, a reference number, a client. There's 3 questions that are mandatory here. But it's possible that I just got started on this task a minute ago, and I'm kind of getting started. I'm starting working on it. I collect my start time, or I changed it to what it should be. Like I think I was actually talking at 11:31, so maybe it was 11:30, whatever. And so I track the task type, and I stop playing around in Momentous, and I just go start doing my work. I'm starting to do whatever a fault investigation is. I'm starting to do that, and I go and do the steps to that task. And then when I'm done with the task, I'm going to fill in the rest of these questions because now I know how the work came to me, what the reference number was, who the client was, things like that. I'm going to fill this stuff in at the end. Well, what happens if I get interrupted? This happens to people a lot during the day. They'll start on something and then they'll get interrupted and then they'll finish it later, right? So I'm going to show you what I'm supposed to do. Like, what happens if my phone is ringing? My phone starts ringing and my boss is calling me. They want to do, it's time for a one-on-one, or they just wanted to ask me a question, kind of a one-on-one with my boss. They just wanted to ask me a question. Well, my phone's ringing. I don't have time to fill in all these questions, source of work, reference number, whatever. I don't have time to fill in all this stuff. I need to go get my phone. So we have this suspend interruption button here. And what this does is, as long as you have a start time and a task in here, which you should put in kind of at the beginning of the task, as if later you're interrupted, it doesn't require you to fill in all these mandatory fields, and it forces an outcome in here of this suspend interruption, which I'm not going to put in there right now. It's going to force that in there, and it's going to force in an end time into the set value here. You don't have to do any of this. You just hit the interruption button, and it says a task was successful. And then you hit set start time, and you get to the one-on-one with your boss, which I know where it is on the list because I'm familiar with the list. Boss called, and then the outcome is completed. You can see once I know how to do this, it only took 5 seconds for me to track that particular task because this is an easy one to track. But I say I get done with my discussion with my boss and I hit submit. And then I'm going to come back and start a new record for my fault. And again, I can, instead of having to scroll through the list to find where the fault was, I just start typing fault and I can get to fault investigation. And then later, maybe I'm going to say, that I did this fault investigation and I finished it. I don't need a comment there. I completed it. It was resolved remotely, and I get an end time. So, and I'm actually going to put this a minute out so you can see the difference because it started at 34 and now it's 35. So I'm going to hit submit. So what I did, what I showed you was I started on a fault and I suspended that task. And then I took a phone call from my boss. And then I finished that. And then I came back and started working the fault again. So I recorded a new entry for that. If I go to the history, I have all that history here. So again, first thing I showed you is at the bottom, training received. Then I started working on the email that somebody had sent me about not in good order inputs or whatever. Then I started on my fault investigation, but I got suspended, interrupted by the interruption. And if I click on this one, I'll show you that there's all those things that were blank are still blank. It didn't force anything in there. It just forced in the outcome of suspend interruption and the end time. So if I go back again to my history, after that, I did my meeting with my boss, just this one. And then I did my fault investigation and finished that task and completed it. And so later, when we come back, we're going to be able to say, okay, I did a fault investigation and spent 3 minutes on it, but then I suspended it. And then I did another fault investigation and spent another minute on it here. And then I resolved it. So in terms of how much time, I really spent 4 minutes, 3 + 1, I spent 4 minutes and got one thing done. So later we'll be able to do all that math to say how long does it take to do one? What's the standard time to do a fault investigation? Really valuable thing. So those are some of the capabilities of the system. I'm probably going to stop. I don't want to go too deep into. There's a whole bunch more here of different details, and these lists are long lists for some of these roles, and these red things are not tasks, they're actually just labels. So the list is broken into different parts of the process. So it's in actually process order, not alphabetical order. And there's things at the end like overhead tasks that everybody does, like team meetings and one-on-ones that we just talked about, or going to training that we used earlier. So there's all these different task types in there. We have to tailor the task types for each situation. It gets tailored for each client or for each role. Each role has a different list of tasks, and each task has a different opportunity for those subordinate questions. And once people get used to it, like I said, it takes about 20 seconds to track each one. So you imagine these people are doing maybe 30 things a day. Let's do the math here. They're doing 30 items a day. Each item maybe takes 10 or 15 minutes on average, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And 30 items a day times 20 seconds to do the tracking is about 10 minutes of work, I think. Elizabeth, you always taught me not to do math in public, but if somebody multiplied 30 items times 20 seconds divided by 60, I think you'd get to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's not that onerous. It's just painful when they first start it. And then once they get used to it, this is what they tell us. Let me get back to my PowerPoint for a second. Is it sharing the full screen now for me, Elizabeth?
You're good.
Yeah. Okay, good. So on the next page, this was actually a group that we started in the morning of a specific day of Thursday. And I've blocked out in blue their names because this is actually from a Teams chat that they were chatting. And we actually keep the meeting open for them to chat afterward. After we've launched them with a launch meeting, we'll keep that meeting open in Teams, and so they can chat on it. So these folks were chatting about how this is not as bad as they thought it was. It's not all that hard once they learn how to do it. And all that with your questions that you asked, really good questions too, kind of get us to the point that we collect all this data, and it's painful to collect the data, but it's just a rich set of data because we have really granular data about what everybody spent their time doing all day long for weeks. And it gives us a great sample size. It gives us the ability to decide if we have data integrity issues, not to include certain data if there's some reason that there's an issue with how they collected it. And then it gives us just a broad variety of things we can do from a process and performance standpoint, which is what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to switch out of demo mode. I will ask, is there any other questions of a demo nature? And Elizabeth, just again, check for me. We have a new slide up that has pink highlights on the right.
Yeah, that looks good. And I'm not seeing more questions right now, but if I do, I'll poke.
Super duper. Okay. So here's one of the things that you can get from the data, which is quantification of how much time we spend on stuff. So this is a team. This is not the same team that's going through it right now. This is a team that we analyzed their data in the past. It was a couple of years ago, actually. And the team, you can see up in the top right in the peach color, there's 189 people on this team. This particular group is a fairly big company with fairly big teams that do separate roles. And this was a role of 189 people that does basically like processing of not in good order work that gets kicked out of the main automation process. So if there's an automation process happens and things go straight through, that's great. Occasionally, something that came from the client doesn't work, and it gets kicked out, and they do a review on it and see what they need to do to fix it, or they direct it to the right place to get it fixed.
Hey, Dodd,
Yeah.
question since you just mentioned this is a specific role.
Mhm.
Faisal had a question, wondering if there is a criteria for picking people to be studied. Is it discussed and approved by the CEO? How do you go about it in an
Sure.
organization?
Yeah, so great question. We do so when we do this, we try to study. I'll go back a couple of slides. Down in the left-hand corner, every role we pick is either out of scope or it's in scope. And if it's in scope, it's everybody. It's not just some of the people, it's everybody who's in that role. And so that's why we have over here 189 people participated, because we had 189 people do it for a number of weeks. And that gives us, again, this vast sample size of 100,000 touches down there at the bottom of the count side where it says 106,735. It's 106,000 tasks that were tracked. And you can see 75,000 of them were this initial review task, but then, 2,800 of them or 2,900 of them were called a standalone task, and 3,900 of them were called DPAC monitoring. I won't tell you what all those things are, but to your point, we do end up, when we select the people to be involved or the roles to be involved, it's highly coordinated with the leadership team. The leadership team of the business decides which roles they want to study and who's going to be included or who might be left out. I think team we're working in right now, for example, left out a couple of data analysts that have specialty roles, and they left out a person who had just been hired last week because it wouldn't make any sense because they're just sitting in training all the time or something like that. So
So, so
yeah.
the follow on to that is that's the role now at a task level. Melissa had a question. Prior to implementing, do you define what each task means? Like the
Oh yes.
criteria to use the
Yeah.
individualized task, like a resource guide to help employees in which task they use?
Yes. I would say some of the time it gets down to the resource guide level. Other times, I can use an example of actually for this team that I'm talking about on this page right now. They have a workflow system. So the task is pretty obvious. It's a workflow task. They have to give us a workflow number, and then we can look up the task type. It's all automatic. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to define what kind of task it is. There's other groups of people where we do have to go through the task list to make sure they understand what it is. And sometimes there are challenges of the operational definition of whether I use this task or that task. And we have to often what we'll do is we'll pilot the time study with a smaller group of people, with a core team of people for about a week, and we'll find all those problems before and we'll make sure we clarify what it
Okay,
all means.
that was great.
Yep.
One more question. Um,
Okay.
and this one is just saying the person seeing the value of the data, but worry about certain work cultures accepting it. Like the fact
Mm-hmm.
that people could be caught in a lie has come up a few times, and there's
Yep.
no punishment, but people might not trust the intent.
Yeah. So again, I'll go back. Nobody will be rewarded or punished for reporting the truth. That doesn't mean you wouldn't be reported that you couldn't be punished for lying. Um, On the other hand, we try to discourage anybody from reacting to any of the data in that way, because what we'd really like to do is to create that positive culture of people wanting to participate in a positive way. And 95% of the people do want to participate in a positive way. And there's a few people who, for whatever reason, it's useful for the leadership team to find out who they are, even though we're not specifically trying to do anything to target them. Sometimes people do it to themselves. And so I think you have to think about this carefully. It's an edgy thing. I agree with your question because it's edgy for me to sit here and say, I do want to know who tells me the truth and who doesn't. If I'm a leader, I want to know that. The leaders love this data because it tells them things they didn't know about their team. Now, what they do about that, they're careful about it. They don't want to create a negative environment about process improvement. They know that, we're doing process improvement across their whole company. So they're very careful about how they react to those things. And sometimes we don't even react at all. We just let them keep reporting it. We just don't use their data at the end. Great questions. I'm not going to cover everything in pink here, but I want to show you the pink highlights. The pink highlights were non-value added work, and what I want to explain how this works. Basically, we have each kind of task. We have the count of the tasks. We have the sum of the time spent. So this is in minutes. These are in minutes, it says, and then you can get to average time per touch by dividing the minutes by the work count. You get to the average time. You can get to the percent of the time by looking at the sum of time column, the sum column. We get to the percent of time spent on each task. And then we can multiply that percent by the number of people that participated and say how many people, or FTE, full-time equivalent, how many people were working on that task. And so those pink ones were targeted because those are, it's not that there's 3 people working on receiving information. It's that there are 189 people working on receiving missing information part of the time during the day. But it tells us that if we could fix our not in good order information problem, if we didn't have missing information, we wouldn't have to go chase it. And therefore that would save us 3.3 people's worth of work. That's very helpful to us when we get to the point of looking at technology changes or investments to say, well, if we invest in improving our missing information, how much is it going to save us? And what this team did, and all the teams we're talking about, actually, all of them, it'll be true. They're not like using this to lay people off. They're using this to get to the point where they don't need to rehire when somebody leaves. And so these teams are all looking at a long-term kind of attrition plan to say, okay, if I do something to improve this work, this team actually also did something around the monitoring one, the one that says monitoring here, where they just stopped doing this monitoring because they found it wasn't value added. It was an additional touch that wasn't value added. I won't describe exactly what it was, but when they did that, they realized, okay, next time, the next 2 people that leave, we don't need to rehire them. We are going to be okay because we know that we were spending 2 people's worth of work on something that we don't do anymore. So I'm going to show you some staffing models that do that better. But the idea here is by saving time, by figuring out how to target different processes, we can save time, and then we can find ways to be more efficient and effective with our workforce. Another thing we can do is to see how much time they were reporting on the time study per day, for the purpose not of rewarding or punishing, because remember, we already said we weren't going to reward or punish anybody who told us the truth about where they spent their time. But if we find that the billing support team is only working 5.5 hours per day, what does that mean to you? There's 57 people here on this. This is a different group. This is 342 people. It's not the same group we just talked about a second ago. But if we have 57 people that are working 5.5 hour days, why would that be? They're not lazy. They wouldn't be able to keep up with their work if they didn't have enough capacity to do it. What it means is that they're over capacity. They have more people than they need in that job. Whereas this role of EDI support down here was working, or even the mailroom, let's say the mailroom, was working 7 hours and 18 minutes a day. If you paid an 8-hour day, that means you only had 40 minutes of breaks in a day and lunch. That's a little bit heavy. We would say typically we'd look for 6.5. We turn the number green when it's above 6.5 per day. And then we say, well, it's not a behavior thing. We're not going after people's behaviors. It's a role design thing. We probably have too many of some of these people, of these invoice analyst ones. They don't have enough work to do. A lot of times it's the junior roles that have been created to help other roles, but there's 61 people working 5 hours and 21 minutes a day, which gives us an opportunity of about 8 or 9 people's worth of work that we would just not have to do, or we wouldn't need as many people to do the same amount of work if they were working productively. It gives us great information about at a snapshot in time how much work there is going on versus how much work we really need to do. Um, and so, again, that can give leaders and the teams a little confidence when we get to the next step, which is staffing models. So I'm going to show you actually staffing models and performance efficiency charts. Um, an efficiency chart, what it does is it does the same kind of thing I was just showing you. It compares the time people are working to the amount of work that's getting done. And so you can see how these arrows are coming to the center with the efficiency chart. We take time from a workforce management system that says, hey, here's how many people were here today and how many hours they worked, how many, if they took PTO, that doesn't count. If they worked overtime, that adds to the hours, whatever. And then we compare that to how much work got done. Say, okay, how much work got done is the volume, the count of tasks that got done, multiplied by the standard time, the time it takes to do each one. Now, each task is different. So it's not just one volume multiplied by a grand average. It's a whole bunch of volume of this multiplied by the standard time for this, the volume of that multiplied by the standard time for that. Add it all up and say, okay, this is how much work we got done compared to this is how much time we had to do it. So here's an example of the chart, and it takes a second to learn how to read it. I know we have a little bit of time left, not too many more charts to look at, but it takes a second. The key is over there on the left-hand side. So the blue line up at the top is how much time we're paying people to be at work. So it's paid time plus overtime, but taking away PTO and voluntary time off, basically saying it's when they were paid to be working, not paid to be doing something else like PTO. So this is measured. You can see the hours here on the scale here are in the thousands of hours. So this would be 16K, 16,000 hours. This is about 17,000 hours. And these are weeks. You can tell 1202, 1209, 1216, they're all 7 days apart. So this is a big, big team. There's like 450 people on this team. And what they had, if you look at how much time they spent at work, then we take away time that can't be productive. So we take away time for breaks, meetings, team meetings, training, mentoring, overhead, other things that can't be measured that are work, like general administrative work or doing my computer-based training that I have to do this week or whatever. We take away all that stuff and we get down to this green line, which is basically the time that's available for credit, which is how much work they could have done if they had enough work to do. And the red is a different source completely. The red is what I talked to you about before on the previous slide of taking the production credit comes from multiplying the volumes they completed by the standard time of each task. And so if you have this gap, what this gap tells us is it's a productivity gap. It's like we got this much work done and we had this much time to do it. So we had extra time. And when this team measured the gap on the first week of 2023, so remember that date because I'll show you another slide in a minute. When they measured that gap, the gap was 2,600 hours per week. And if you figured that 6.5 hours per day productivity assumption, you divide 2,600 by about 32.5 is 6.5 times 5 days in a week. That would be the weekly gap divided by the weekly hours per week equals 80 people's worth of work. That's where that 80 FTE came from. So this was a team of 450 people that had 80 extra people. And the numbers told them that from all the time studies, from taking the time study data and multiplying it by the volumes and then comparing it to the amount of time that people were working. It doesn't mean people were lazy. In fact, it's the opposite of that. They were getting all their work done. They weren't being lazy. They were getting all their work done. They were just overstaffed. They had more people than they needed. And they didn't know it. The leaders didn't know how much more. They didn't know how many more. This story is actually going to go up. The operations leader from this company and I are going to go to an ASQ conference, Lean Six Sigma ASQ conference, and present kind of a broader story that's been approved by the leadership team to tell this part and some parts about fixing some backlogs of work that they had. So not only did they have a gap in efficiency, but they were also backlogged in that prior year, which is kind of interesting. Sometimes you'd think that if you're backlogged that you don't have enough capacity to keep up, but in this case they did. It was in the wrong roles. Different people are trained on different things, and so this particular role was backlogged, and these roles were overstaffed, and nobody knew it. So all that time study data, if you look at that date, here's that same date in the bottom left corner, January 6th to 23. This is the forward-looking chart for the next 9 months. Because what the leaders did was they got brave and they stopped hiring when they didn't need to hire people to replace people that were leaving. They didn't fire anybody. They didn't let anybody go. They just, as they had natural attrition occur in their business, and in the 2023 timeframe, there was quite a bit of that, and all the quiet quitting going on, everything else. They just let their business reduce staffing slowly, and they watched the gap between the red and green line close, and then it's been stable since then. So if you kind of turn your mind off for the other colors and look at the red is kind of going down a tiny bit as they make improvements to non-value added work and things like that. But for the most part, they're still getting the same amount of work done, but with less people, with the right number of people. The efficiency improved by 84 FTE, which was very similar to the gap we had originally measured back at the beginning. Right, the week before this all started was on the prior page. And then the last thing I'll tell you is they even predicted this. Not only did they get it, not only did they get this improvement, but they had a staffing model that they used to predict how much time it would take to get all the work done and how many people they needed. And I'm going to show you how that works in a second. I'll flash up this page really quickly of the staffing model assumptions, where I could tell you, you kind of take the math here of how much time you had to do work. You take away lunch, you take away PTO, which is about 12% of your time. It's about an hour a day. It's not every day, right? It's some days it's all day and other days it's none, but it averages about an hour a day of personal time off. Take away breaks and general administration and overhead and huddles and one-on-ones and other non-production work that doesn't, training and mentoring are good examples of that. And you get to this 5-hour standard. So basically it shouldn't be surprising, but sometimes people are surprised to say that out of an 8-hour day worked, I only get 5 hours of work done. Yep, that's pretty much true. So we use that data on the next page to figure out how many people we needed in each of these roles. And it doesn't matter what the roles are. There are different teams that had different scopes of work. And we did the same thing that we mentioned before on the previous slides. We multiply the volume times the volume of work that we expect to see times the standard times, the times that it takes to do each kind of task. We add all that up, and then we divide by the if we go back to this hours per day, we divide by that 5 hours a day, and we say, okay, how many people do we need to do all that work? And by dividing by 5 hours a day, the number actually goes up. If you were to divide by a bigger number, the number would go down. But by dividing by 5 hours a day, it makes it a higher number. It's a rational number for how many people they need. So the really cool thing was at the beginning, that same date, January of 23, they were at 508. And what the model said was by December, we needed to be down at 425. And these orange numbers were all modeled numbers. They were predicted numbers because they ran the staffing model in April of 23. So basically they were saying, hey, the model is predicting that we only need 425 people. The difference between 508 and 425 is 83 or something like that. Is that right? I'm not sure if that's right. It can't be. It can't be so close to 84 FTE that was on the prior slide. This one here, this 84 FTE. They actually changed by 84 FTE, and the prediction was 83 FTE. It was right on. And they did it. And I don't know if you can, I mean, and this is a team that has some US and some outside the US people and things like that. But if you can imagine what 84 people's worth of work is worth to the company, and you can imagine also, somebody might wonder, how do the people feel about this? We call this engaged team performance. How do the people feel about this? People want to be on an efficient team. There's no one more terrified than a person who only has 5 hours of work to do when they come to work today, or 4 hours or something like that. That person's always looking over their shoulder because they're worried that somebody's going to find out that they don't have enough work to do, and not just give them more work, but people are worried that they might, get laid off or whatever. So a company that's doing this the right way of using the data to figure out how many people they need in what role. And they can do this not just at the aggregate, but in each kind of role. They do this in each kind of role to say, how many people do we need to get the work done? How much work is there to do? It's really super powerful. Um, I'm going to get to the end here and say, I think we're almost out of time, but we've had a few questions along the way. I can certainly take more if you want, or if you ever want to, you can just engage my limited lifetime warranty in that I have a limited lifetime. But if you call me during that limited lifetime, I will try to answer your question, or we'll even give you a deeper demo of the system. Or if your business is interested in using some of these concepts to improve, please tell us, and we'd love to help you.
Nice job, Dodd. And thank you for that last piece of what it feels like to be on a team where, you're lean and mean, and you've worked your way to get there, that people are enjoying that. I think there was one comment, Vernon said, knowing the overtime hours could really inform staffing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you add in those charts, you add in the overtime and that's expensive, right? Overtime costs even more. There are times it's a good idea. Like if you have a cyclical work that you've got a month, there's more to do. You don't want to carry lots of people all year just to do 1 month's extra work. So sometimes overtime's a really good strategy, but you want to do all the math to see what the right optimum set points are for those staffing models.
That's great, Dodd. And you're getting lots of thanks here. Very interesting. Thanks for a wonderful session. We are up against the clock. But thank you so much for coming, Dodd. This was awesome, and you answered some great questions. And yeah, this is well done. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great to see everyone.
Bye, guys.